This all started with this artwork, which I saw online and I wanted to know who made it. So I queued up my favorite search engine and found out the artist's name was Dan Flavin. It turns out he made great looking fluorescent light art, like this, and this, and this. And as I read more about him, I also read about a related artist named Donald Judd. Donald Judd made art like this, and this, and this, and as I was reading about Donald Judd, I saw that he had written a famous essay in 1964 called Specific Objects, and I set out to read it. The essay is not long, it's only about 6 pages, and it mostly seeks to describe commonalities between new art that was being created in the 1960s. This new art, he writes, is not really painting or sculpture, but it has elements of both of those. He writes about how limited painting and sculpture can be, and then he gives a bunch of examples of the new art. Klaus Oldenburg, Frank Stella, John Chamberlain, and even Dan Flavin are mentioned. If you look at all these, they do have a lot in common. Donald Judd writes that they're all three-dimensional, they're all made up of a variety of colors, and they all use unusual materials compared to typical painting and sculpture. But one of the commonalities that Donald Judd hones in on is that they're all singular objects. And I think the best way to see this is by comparing it to other sculptures at the time, like Joseph Cornell's bird boxes, one of which is shown on the right. If you look at these next to each other, you might notice that Cornell's bird box is comprised of a lot of pieces, and the artwork is more about the composition of those pieces and how they relate to each other. But Dan Flavin's work on the left, while it is made of pieces, is less about the arrangement of those pieces and more about how they come together to make a single object. Donald Judd in his essay goes into detail about all of the artists I just listed and why their work fits the new framework, but it struck me as interesting from a game developer's perspective as well. Based on that essay, I made a game called Extrareality Codebreaker, which was an alternative controller game where the idea was to pass puzzles from the screen onto objects in the real world. There are 2 knobs. The top knob selects the puzzle, and the bottom knob controls it. You were also given laminated paper objects, sort of like crossword grids, and you had to complete them from the objects on the screen, writing on them using a dry erase marker. A few of the 16 puzzles are shown here. As an example for how the puzzles work, there was a puzzle where you controlled a dot in a race, and you were given this podium object shown on the right. Depending on where you finished, you would get different letters, which you used to fill out the podium object. Then after it was all done, if you followed the path in the race, it would spell out what is left, and looking at the remaining letters would give you the answer word, enter. While this was an attempt at using the ideas from the essay, it didn't engage with those ideas particularly well, because it was more about the individual puzzles than any sort of unified object. But the nice part about trying things is that you can always try again, and over the years I've thought about the ideas from this essay more. And one part from the start of it has really stuck with me. It's from when Donald Judd is critiquing some of the limits of painting, and he writes, "The main thing wrong with painting is that it is a rectangular plane placed flat against the wall. It determines and limits the arrangement of whatever is on or inside of it. As puzzle game developers, we make games on a rectangular plane flat against the wall. If the rectangle of the painting itself is bounding the art, then it's worth thinking about the boundaries and separations that we as puzzle designers make between the solver and the puzzle. In a typical puzzle game, you have the screen, then the game window, then the menu, the world, the level, and finally, the puzzle. Before a player has even begun to play a puzzle, they're 5 degrees separated from it. So maybe it would be an interesting idea and lead to interesting design decisions to reduce this as much as possible and have the menus, worlds, levels, and puzzles all blended together as one object. In my games, I've tried to live up to that ideal. That's why the menus in 20 Small Mazes are a puzzle, and the mazes are all stacked on top of each other. And why in Strange Jigsaws, whenever you transition from one area to another, it's a movement in space. Because I'm trying to not provide any separations from the puzzles, but unify them as closely as possible. There are definitely still areas where there are separations. The mazes are bound by frames, and the jigsaws mostly go into rectangles. But I think there's something here. There's so little we know about puzzles, and there's still so much to explore. And you can imagine that there's some way to design them so that they're not bounded. They somehow escape this framing and separation, and are able to exist not as a composition of pieces, but more as a singular thing. It's unclear how to get there, but following an abstract ideal like this has led me to interesting design decisions. And I hope one day I get a chance to play a game where I can confidently say that what I'm playing is a puzzle object, even if I don't know what that means yet.